In one of the most riveting showdowns ever witnessed on the frontier, a single bullet soared through the air and changed a widow's destiny. Imagine a lone rider, her name is Rosalind Carmichael, turning heads with her quiet resolve, surrounded by outlaws who ignore every warning she fires. Tensions mount, gunpowder lingers in the air, and the future of an entire ranch depends on her unshakable aim and nerves of steel. Want to know how her final standoff ends? Stick around for the full story, where each dramatic twist and bullet's impact leads to a moment no one in Salvation's End could have predicted. For diving headlong into this thrilling tale, we'd love for you to subscribe to our channel. Your support fuels our passion for sharing more incredible, untamed frontier stories like Rosalind's. Every click of that notification bell ensures you won't miss a single update. Buckle in, friends, because what happens on that dusty street will leave you breathless. Late autumn sun stretched its coppery rays across the plains surrounding a remote settlement called Salvation's End, lighting up a weathered sign that read, "The Golden Horseshoe Saloon," like a dim lantern. On the edge of nowhere, this saloon marked the boundary between uneasy civilization and the vast, lawless frontier. The settlement itself was so modest that many official maps failed to note its existence. Yet its handful of buildings and dusty roads had a peculiar magnetism for people eager to do business outside official scrutiny. On a particular evening, as swirling dust devils made patterns in the waning light, death seemed to drift in, wearing the polite smile of a gentleman, but carrying the quiet resolve of a bounty hunter. Beneath the changing sky, the battered saloon doors groaned as a newcomer pressed through them, a solitary figure in a dark hat and riding boots, stepping into a space that had been alive with music, rowdy conversation, and the smell of cheap whiskey. Only moments before, all conversation froze, glasses stopped midway to thirsty lips. Suspicious glances flickered toward the woman whose presence brought this abrupt stillness. She was Rosalind Carmichael, a widow in her mid-30s, with chestnut hair, faintly streaked by copper drawn back tightly beneath her hat. Her features hinted at sun-worn experience. Someone who had spent years under this punishing frontier sun. The long riding dress she wore, once elegant, was neatly patched in several places, showing that while she cared about appearances, she prized function first. A close-fitting leather vest hugged her torso, equipped with pockets for practical use rather than decoration. But what drew every watcher's eye was the matched pair of revolvers resting in low-slung holsters at her hips. These weapons, shimmering with careful polish, seemed built for precise violence, incongruent with her otherwise soft-spoken, unthreatening demeanor. In the hush of the room, Rosalind made her way to the bar. Her boots whispered across the sawdust-strewn floorboards. Tense silence weighed heavily in the saloon, from the stale exhalations of men who'd spent too many hours gambling to the edgy shift of bodies sensing that a confrontation loomed. The barkeep. Felix Boyd recognized her at once. He'd been pouring whiskey in Salvation's End since the place was only a sprawl of tents and wooden skeletons. Even in Mrs. Carmichael, he greeted more quietly than usual. As he leaned over the counter to pour a shot of whiskey, his thick forearms trembled just a bit. "You passing through?" he asked, voice neutral, mindful of the sharp energy in the room. Rosalind lifted the offered glass without haste, taking a small sip that seemed meant more to taste than to soothe. "Not passing through," she said, her words carrying with a distinct clarity. "I'm here on business. I can't avoid." This subdued conversation nonetheless captured everyone's attention, including that of 9 men who sat in the saloon's center. Each wore fine clothes compared to the rest of the customers, and their arrogant laughter suggested they believed the entire establishment, perhaps even the entire town, rotated around them. At the center of these 9 was Desmond Rayburn, leader of a gang known around these parts as the Rayburn Riders. Rumor had it they orchestrated stagecoach holdups, ranch raids, and a growing list of bodies left to rot in unmarked graves across 3 territories. No one dared to challenge them until that moment. Desmond Rayburn was not an especially large man, but his presence radiated confidence. His hair was combed into meticulous waves beneath a stark black hat crowned with a silver band. His neatly trimmed beard framed a mouth that sometimes bore a smile. But that smile never warmed his eyes, which gleamed coldly, especially when he was about to claim something he believed belonged to him. Rayburn set aside his half-empty glass and stood the chair, scraping rudely on the floorboards. "Good evening, ma'am," he called, his silky voice loud enough to carry. "I don't recall seeing you before. You got a name or just that fancy hardware?" Rosalind barely glanced at him. Instead, she carefully placed her glass on the bar, paying no heed to the men who stared in her direction. I do have a name, Mr. Rayburn, she said simply, but you already seem to know it. You and your crew have made it impossible to ignore your presence in Salvation's End. With those few words, she established that this was not a chance meeting. She knew exactly who he was, and her voice bore no quiver. The ensuing quiet was almost unbearably tense, as though the entire saloon collectively held its breath. One or two men near the far wall edged toward the door, wanting no part in the inevitable showdown. Rayburn let out a theatrical laugh, glancing at the men in his retinue, as though to say, "You see what we're dealing with here?" He removed his hat and executed a mocking bow. "Now, ma'am," he purred, "we don't want no trouble. My men and I are simply enjoying local hospitality while waiting on some business opportunities to pan out." His feigned civility was as thin as the dusty glass windows behind him. "But since you appear to be taking an interest, perhaps you'd like to discuss your plans, your future, especially given recent events." His pointed remark was a deliberate nudge at painful memories. Rosalind's husband, Joshua Carmichael, had been laid to rest only days ago. She had ridden into town mostly to settle some accounts and let her intentions be known. Joshua Carmichael's name still held weight in these parts. He had once owned the sprawling Carmichael Ranch, a wide sweep of prime land with an essential water source that everyone in the territory envied. Though the couple had faced many challenges over the years, no one, including Desmond Rayburn, could have expected that Carmichael Ranch would so soon pass into the widow's hands, a widow apparently unafraid to stand her ground. Rosalind took another sip of whiskey, letting it burn down her throat before calmly returning the glass to the bar. In contrast, Rayburn was smiling like a cat confronted by a mouse that refused to run. He tilted his head. "I heard a rumor, Mrs. Carmichael," he said, his voice carefully modulated for politeness. "It's a crying shame what happened to your husband. I'm told you've got the entire ranch to manage now, and that's quite a burden on a woman alone." Several pairs of eyes twitched back and forth, evaluating whether Rosalind would crumple under the pressure of the recent tragedy, but she stood there unbroken, one hand resting near her custom revolver. She was not tall yet. Something in her posture filled up that saloon a quiet authority. "Carmichael Ranch," she answered in a low voice, "is under my stewardship now. That's true. And as you can see, I haven't exactly gone begging for help." Her gaze, a mesmerizing amber flecked with brown, swept across Rayburn's men. They were used to men who cowered, or men who foolishly bragged about their prowess. They were not used to a woman who matched them with composure and refused to wilt. The hum of tension in the saloon thickened. The local barkeep, Felix Boyd, did his best to appear preoccupied, polishing glasses behind the counter, though it was obvious his entire being was tuned to the confrontation. A few gamblers cornered at a nearby table paused their game, letting the cards droop from half-raised hands. Nobody wanted to miss, or worse, get caught in the crossfire of what could erupt. Desmond Rayburn let his pleasant mask slip for just a second, annoyance shining through. Then he spun his hat in his hands and shrugged. "Times are tough," he remarked. "Ranching is no easy thing, and it's especially precarious when you've got no one to guard your back. Droughts made water scarce and outlaws roam thicker than ever." He caught his reflection in a bottle behind the bar and straightened. "But I am a man of business, not cruelty. I'd hate to see Carmichael Ranch ruined by uncertain leadership. So I'm here to propose a solution." Rosalind's shoulders tensed, bracing for the angle he would play. "Your solution, Mr. Rayburn," she replied with cool interest. "Let's hear it." She had come here knowing some trouble would arise, but she wanted to gauge whether Rayburn's demands had escalated to immediate violence, or if he believed he could talk her into compliance. His lips curved upward in what he must have thought was an encouraging smile. "I'll purchase Carmichael Ranch, better yet, I'll protect it, and you make sure you've got a comfortable arrangement, your water rights, your assets. Well, we can talk numbers, but I'm sure we'll come to an agreement that benefits everyone. Much better than letting the bank in Prosperity Junction or some other unscrupulous folks decide your future." A pin could have dropped in the saloon, and everyone would have heard it. Felix Boyd stiffened behind the bar, his face an uneasy mask. Rosalind's next words, presumably the hinge on which the confrontation would pivot, were delayed by her tipping the whiskey glass to her lips one last time. She set it down gently. "Mr. Rayburn," she said, "your concern is noted, but I don't need your money or your protection. If my husband left any unfinished business, I'll handle it alone." She pushed away from the bar with delicate control as if to walk out. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Desmond Rayburn stepped sideways, blocking her path with a sleek motion that reminded her of a coiled snake. "I'm afraid I wasn't offering a choice," he said, the pretense of politeness dropping away. "You see, I've staked a claim. An interest, we might say, in your ranch, and I have the means to ensure I get it." I tried to come at this politely. His voice dropped. "Let's not make it rough." An electric current jolted through the saloon. Three of Rayburn's men rose in unison, their movements stiff with readiness. Others reached near their holsters. A hush of anticipation pressed on every set of lungs in the room. Rosalind's heartbeat roared in her ears, though outwardly she showed no sign of fear. "You want to buy something that's not for sale," she said, lifting her gaze to stare Rayburn in the eyes. "But you make a grave mistake, thinking I'll just hand it over." For a moment, Desmond Rayburn locked eyes with Rosalind Carmichael, measuring her resolve. Onlookers watched, many with bated breath, others already edging away from the center of the action. It was at that tense juncture that Clint, a tall man, bearing a distinctive scar from his left temple down to his jaw, stepped up behind Rayburn. "All good here, Desmond?" he asked, voice gravelly, eyes never leaving Rosalind. Clint's presence was like the rough edge of a blade, uncompromising, ready to cut. "Oh, we're just negotiating," Rayburn replied, though any civility in his tone had grown brittle. "Mrs. Carmichael needs a little extra convincing." He let the words hang. "I'm sure we can accommodate." He paused, sweeping a hand around as though introducing the saloon. "Fine establishment, fine folks. No need to do something regrettable." Rosalind felt every muscle in her body tauten. The memories of her husband's funeral still loomed fresh. She had hardly begun to grieve before being forced to manage the ranch. Yet she also recalled the countless nights Joshua had spent teaching her how to aim, how to remain calm when threatened, and how sometimes a single bullet placed deliberately carried far more power than 100 threats. She did not draw yet. Instead, she quietly slipped a coin from her pocket and set it on the bar, paying for her whiskey. "Since you've had your say, Mr. Rayburn, I'll be heading home now," she said. "Step aside." Rayburn glanced at Clint, who shook his head slowly. "This is still a conversation," Clint interjected. "We'd prefer not to have it turn nasty, but we can't let you walk away without an agreement." As he spoke, one of the men at the large table slowly rose, shifting his coat to reveal a revolver grip. Watching the entire interplay, Felix Boyd twitched, perhaps reaching for the shotgun hidden beneath his bar. The patrons who remained wished themselves anywhere else. Tension strangled the air. Mrs. Carmichael, Rayburn said, voice carrying a sinister calm, "I sympathize. It ain't easy to lose a loved one, but the territory is unforgiving. A woman alone on a big spread like the Carmichael Ranch is a magnet for trouble." Finally, Rosalind's self-restraint slipped from mild frustration to open defiance. "I appreciate the warning," she said, "but Carmichael Ranch has faced trouble before. We've survived droughts, rustlers, and land disputes. I don't need your help." Every syllable rang with clarity, and still Rayburn refused to move aside. A grin twisted Rayburn's lips, revealing the sharp edges of his teeth. "Maybe you're a fine shot, or maybe you're bluffing. But are you good enough to handle the full weight of my men?" He gestured to his gang. "We're not talking about random rustlers or petty thieves. These are veterans of 100 fights. Let's be pragmatic. Surrender the land. Accept my terms, or we can find out how you measure up in a real altercation." The saloon's oppressive hush broke in an explosive moment when Rosalind's gaze flicked to the ceiling. Before anyone realized what was happening, her hand darted to her revolver. She fired in a single fluid motion. The thunder of the shot made the saloon's rafters vibrate. A glass bottle behind the bar, an expensive brand Rayburn himself had been enjoying, shattered into shards and spilled whiskey. The precision startled them more than the shot itself. In that hush, Rosalind lowered the weapon, smoke curling from the barrel. "If you doubt my aim," she said evenly, "I'll remind you that was just a demonstration. Next time I won't aim at glass." Desmond Rayburn's grin vanished. The ruthless predator in him flared in his eyes. Anger twisted his features, but he realized in that stunned moment that no one else in the room had expected her to be that fast or that accurate. At the periphery, Rayburn's men tensed. Clint's scar twitched as he slowly moved his hand to his gun. But Rayburn barked, "Steady!" He stared at Rosalind. "You've made a big mistake. No one humiliates me like this and lives comfortable afterward." Rosalind holstered her revolver with the same calm deliberation. "The only mistake," she said, "would be standing in my way again." The tension that crackled between them might have ignited the entire saloon if they'd remained there longer. Instead, Rayburn stepped back, offering a half-hearted bow that was more threat than respect. "We'll continue this," Rayburn promised. "I'll find you again soon." "No doubt," Rosalind replied. She retreated, backing out through the swinging doors, never letting them out of her sight until she reached the boardwalk outside. Her steps echoed on the weathered planks. She exhaled once feeling the tension fill her lungs. After a moment, she turned and disappeared into the deepening twilight, leaving a room full of men who suddenly realized how fragile their illusions of safety had been inside Desmond. Rayburn stared after her, face impassive once more. Boss Clint murmured. Rayburn's expression was colder than a desert night. "We're going to find out everything about that widow," he said. "We'll see how well she stands when we turn her own domain against her. She'll regret that shot." Clint nodded, exchanging grim looks with the others. To them, Rosalind Carmichael was now more than an annoyance. She was a threat that demanded eradication. Rosalind rode through the gathering dusk, guiding her silver-gray mare along the lonely trail that led to Carmichael Ranch. The buildings rose out of the gloom like guardians of an era she and Joshua had dreamed of shaping. There was the great barn made of sturdy timber, and the main house a stout combination of logs and stone that hinted at permanence rather than the usual transience one found on the frontier high in the sky. The first faint stars emerged, glimmering like watchful eyes on the events unfolding below. She brought her mare to a gentle stop in the ranch yard, exhaling a breath that felt weighted with the day's troubles. The ranch was too quiet. Usually the lowing of cattle or the chatter of ranch hands settled in for the evening would greet her. But today the place felt hollow, as though bracing for a tragedy to come. Leaning over to remove her saddle, she tensed when she sensed a shape detach itself from the barn's shadows. She reached toward her holster, but a familiar voice spoke up. "Easy, Mrs. Carmichael. Just me." Out of the shadows came Garrett Flynn, the ranch's long-standing foreman. He had begun working for Joshua Carmichael before Rosalind had even moved onto the property. In his early 60s, Garrett was weathered and wiry, with a face that had the lines of a lifetime's labor under the unforgiving sun. "Reckon you didn't find peace in town," he observed. "That's an understatement," Garrett Rosalind replied. She pulled the saddle off the mare, letting the horse relax. "Rayburn cornered me at the saloon." The foreman's frown deepened. "So it's come to that?" He took the saddle from her, carrying it toward the barn. "I've been suspecting he'd make a move, but I hoped they'd at least respect Joshua's memory for a time." He paused. "I'm sorry you had to face that alone." "Should have been there." She appreciated Garrett's loyalty, yet she also knew she couldn't risk openly involving all her men, not when she wasn't sure which alliances might shift under Rayburn's offers. "I needed to test the waters," she said, "and Rayburn or someone higher up has bigger plans. This goes beyond the typical land dispute or water access squabbles. They're too bold, too certain they can take what they want." Garrett scratched his head, releasing a slow sigh. "Then we need to prepare." He threw a glance at the silent ranch. "I sent most of the men to the North Range per your instructions, but some remain on standby. I'll gather them if you say the word." Rosalind hung the bridle on a hook, pulling off her riding gloves. "Not yet, soon, but first I need to confirm something Joshua shared with me." When she said her husband's name, the feeling of loss cut through her again, a raw ache that nearly made her hand tremble. She steadied herself with an exhale. "What is it?" Garrett asked, noticing her shift in demeanor. Taking another breath, Rosalind steeled herself and motioned for Garrett to follow her inside the main house. Through the dimly lit front room, they went to Joshua's study, a richly paneled sanctuary that bore marks of his meticulous nature. "I must check something," she murmured, stepping to a corner. She ran her hand along the wood paneling until she found the hidden latch. With a soft click, a section of the wall popped open, revealing a shallow compartment. Inside was a sturdy metal lockbox. Garrett drew closer, brow furrowing. "What's that?" "The reason Rayburn, or whoever he works for, is so determined," Rosalind answered quietly. She withdrew a small key from a chain around her neck, sliding it into the box's lock. "At least I suspect it is." The lock clicked open. Within the box lay a bundle of documents, some official papers bearing territorial seals, and a folded map marked with topographical notations. Carefully, she lifted the map, spreading it on the desk. Garrett leaned over, eyes narrowing as he read the notations. "Coal deposits," he muttered. "Joshua always suspected there was something under that western ridge." Rosalind traced a line on the map with her fingertip. "That's only part of it. These documents mention deeper resources. Oil, perhaps?" "Joshua hired a geologist from the east a few months ago. The man's analysis suggests the land might hold more than just a modest seam. If that's true, then it's no wonder Rayburn's so aggressive. Garrett's breath whistled. Oil's big money in the East now. If you've got enough of it, that's a gold mine, and gold mines don't remain hidden for long. He paused, scanning more details. Joshua must have known it would draw predators. Is that why he sent these to be registered in your name? Rosalind swallowed. Yes. He was always one step ahead, said I had to be prepared, especially if anything happened to him. Her voice tightened on the last words. She closed the box and locked it again. They killed him, Garrett, I'm sure of it. Garrett's expression hardened, and they're not done yet. They'll want to push you off the land or force you to sign it over. Rosalind gently replaced the box in the hidden compartment, which is why we have to be ready, she said. They'll return soon, probably with more men and heavier tactics. She latched the panel shut. Meet me at dawn, we'll talk strategy. If it comes down to a standoff, I want them facing more than just me alone. At dawn, the light of a new day seemed almost defiant, casting long shadows across the rolling pastures of Carmichael Ranch. Rosalind stood at the edge of a western slope, brass spyglass in hand, surveying the far boundary. The land unspooled under the warm glow, golden grasses rustling in the early breeze. She thought of how she and Joshua had walked these trails 100 times, pondering improvements and expansions. Now every quiet grove and winding creek felt like a potential battleground. Beside her, Garrett Flynn hovered protectively, arms folded. Have you decided on a plan, he asked. Rayburn knows about the coal and possibly suspects deeper deposits. He won't just scare you. He'll come in force. Rosalind lowered the spyglass, her eyes scanning the horizon. We have about a dozen men left on the ranch. The rest we discreetly move to a higher range so they're not targeted. That might prove an advantage if we coordinate. She closed the spyglass. We'll have them come back in small groups over the next days. Let's not reveal our full strength immediately. Understood. Garrett nodded. What about the law? Might be worth notifying the sheriff in Prosperity Junction. Her mouth twisted in doubt. Sheriff, there is no match for well-funded men like Rayburn. Besides, he's already under the influence of bigger fish. No, we need leverage documents. We need to send someone to the territorial Judge Clayton up in Prosperity Junction to register an official claim for federal protection. Once the feds get word there's potential oil here, they'll have reason to intervene, at least in theory. Garrett scratched his chin. You're playing a dangerous game. If the feds come, they might want the land under their own terms. Rosalind replaced the spyglass in her saddlebag. Joshua planned for that. He believed partial federal oversight would be safer than letting unscrupulous barons buy everything under the table. Even if we lose some autonomy, at least we won't lose it all, and the ranch workers won't be evicted by force. Then I'll send a man first thing, Garrett said. Make it discreet, Rosalind instructed. Rayburn probably has watchers on the roads. If they suspect we're calling in official backup, they'll act quickly and violently. Garrett nodded and went off to find a messenger. Rosalind lingered, gazing at the mosaic of fields. Even in the face of danger, she felt that indescribable bond to this land. It had been Joshua's dream and hers to build something enduring here. She would not let it be taken. With a determined set to her shoulders, she headed for the barn, where a young ranch hand awaited Jonah Greyfeather. One of the newest workers approached leading 2 saddled horses. A quiet man of mixed heritage, Jonah was rumored to be part Apache, his movements lithe and silent. I heard you might need a tracker, he said. Yes, Rosalind replied. We're going to scout the line shack on the western ridge. Joshua left a key with Garrett, and it opens something out there. He must have kept it hidden. I want to see what's inside before Rayburn's men arrive. Jonah nodded, offering her the reins of a sturdy bay mare. It's a steep ride, and Rayburn's men might be sniffing around. We'll have to go off the main trail. She swung into the saddle easily. Good. Let's ride. They set off at a brisk pace, winding through gullies and stands of juniper that concealed them from casual observers. The morning sun climbed higher, intensifying the dryness in the air. As they rode, Rosalind felt a mixture of urgency and curiosity. What had Joshua hidden out at that shack, and why had he kept it so secret? No more than an hour into their ride, Jonah held up a hand to halt. He pointed to a rise some distance ahead. One of Rayburn's scouts. See him. Through squinted eyes, Rosalind caught the outline of a figure perched on the ridge, scanning the landscape. If we go straight, he'll spot us. Rosalind nodded, face set. We'll circle wide. Over that rocky pass. A quick mental assessment told her they might need to climb on foot near the end, but a hidden approach was worth the effort. Jonah led them with deft skill. Reading the land the way some men read newspapers, he found a narrow path through scree and boulders. The horses struggled at points, but they pressed on. Finally, they crested a ridge that sloped down to a small plateau where the line shack stood. From a distance, the line shack looked exactly as one would expect, a simple structure, built of rough-hewn logs set against the wild backdrop of stony slopes and scraggly brush. Smoke-stained shingles hinted at many winters when ranch hands sheltered there during boundary patrols. But as Rosalind and Jonah drew nearer, they both noticed signs that someone had been there recently. The door hung slightly ajar. A faint odor of disturbed dust lingered, as though a search had just taken place. Jonah dismounted first, scanning the area. Tracks around the perimeter. Looks like a few men, might be Rayburn's. He drew a small knife, its blade dull so as not to reflect the sun. Rosalind retrieved a revolver from her saddlebag. Not the special one, but a standard sidearm. Her nerves prickled. Stay alert. They moved quietly forward, the horses left, tethered in a small stand of juniper, where they wouldn't be obvious. A few yards from the shack, Rosalind motioned for Jonah to wait, then slipped along the wall, pressing her ear to the rough timber. Inside was silent. She eased the door open with the barrel of her gun, revealing a scene of disarray. Floorboards had been torn up. A thin mattress, slashed open stovepipe, dismantled. Whoever came had been searching thoroughly, but apparently left empty-handed. They didn't find whatever Joshua hid. Rosalind murmured relief mingling with caution. Jonah joined her, scanning corners with sharp eyes. Satisfied no one was crouched in wait, he nodded. They left quickly, maybe last night or early morning. Rosalind recalled the small key Garrett had given her. Approaching the shack's single window, she noticed a subtle difference in the wood paneling. The left side of the window frame was carved slightly, as though it could pivot. Feeling along the edge, she applied mild pressure. With a faint click, a compartment opened. Jonah whistled softly. Inside rested a leather pouch, heavy and rectangular. Rosalind's pulse quickened. She slipped the pouch out with trembling hands. Before she could inspect its contents, Jonah hissed, "We've got movement outside," pressing the pouch into her vest. Rosalind quietly hurried to the door. From the shack's threshold, she glimpsed two riders approaching from the south. She recognized one, Clint Rayburn's scar-faced lieutenant. They were still a fair distance off, but heading straight for the shack. "They must have circled back to double-check," she whispered. "Better slip out the back," Jonah said. But that slope is rough. There was no alternative. They couldn't face a direct firefight with two men who might have more reinforcements trailing behind. Jonah and Hannah stepped outside, scanning for an escape route. Rosalind followed, staying low. "We'll move down that rock slide into the gully," Jonah pointed. "It's treacherous, but they can't shoot what they can't see." The pair made a silent exit, slipping behind a cluster of boulders. Their boots dislodged small stones that clattered down the slope. They froze at every sound. Above them, they heard the rumble of horses as Clint and his companion reached the shack. Shouts carried across the plateau. "Someone's been here, check around." A gunshot shattered the relative calm, ricocheting off rocks. Another followed. Rosalind steadied herself, pressing her back against stone, each shot reminding her how slim the margin was between success and disaster. Jonah pointed. "We can edge around this ledge and drop into the creek bed. Let's go." They descended carefully, sometimes sliding on loose gravel, sometimes grabbing at precarious roots. Bullets kicked up dust, though the vantage was poor for Clint's men. One slug whined off a rock only feet away from Rosalind. Another lodged in the slope, loosening a volley of pebbles. Despite the adrenaline hammering in her veins, she clenched the strap of her vest containing Joshua's final secret. If that item could answer critical questions like who might have orchestrated her husband's demise, then she had to keep it safe. 10 minutes of nerve-wracking maneuvering brought them to the creek bed, partially dried. With hearts pounding, they scanned for watchers. Seeing none, they started back toward their horses in a broad circle around the ridge. They traveled at a near jog, occasionally pausing to confirm no pursuit was close on their heels. Only when they retrieved their mounts did Rosalind dare to exhale in relief. Jonah looked at her, a question in his eyes. "That bag in your vest." In time, she said, "Let's get home safely first." Then she glanced at the ridgeline. "We'll need to keep an eye out. Clint won't forget that he almost cornered us." Jonah gave a grim nod, and they rode off, returning to Carmichael. Ranch by a route Rayburn's men were less likely to stake out. The item now pressed against Rosalind's chest felt heavier than its mere physical weight, an artifact that might be the final piece to stopping Desmond Rayburn and the hidden forces behind him. They made it back well after sunset. The ranch lay draped in the hush of night, only a few lamps shining from windows. Immediately, Garrett Flynn and a few ranch hands hurried forward, relief plain on their faces. "We were worried," said the foreman. "Folks in town report that Rayburn's men have stepped up vigilance, Hollis, Clint, and a few others." "We ran into them," Rosalind replied, tersely dismounting. "But we got what we needed." She patted her vest. "Let's head inside. There's something I need to see." Under the flickering glow of a single oil lamp in the study, Rosalind withdrew the leather pouch. Inside, to her astonishment, she found a custom revolver so intricately engraved that it seemed more a work of art than a mere firearm. Its barrel was slightly longer than standard, the cylinder carved with rose and thorn motifs. Garrett let out a soft whistle. "That's no ordinary shooter." Rosalind turned it in her hands, heart clenching as she noticed an inscription near the butt. To her, from J. May, "Your aim forever be true." From J. May, your. She shut her eyes, reflecting on how Joshua must have commissioned this, quietly planning for a day she'd need it. Carefully, she also withdrew a folded paper from the pouch. Recognizing her husband's handwriting, she scanned it. "My dearest Rosalind, if you are reading this, circumstances must be dire indeed. I apologize for keeping secrets. I believed you'd need this weapon and the knowledge that accompanies it. There is more beneath our land than meets the eye, and powerful men will stop at nothing to claim it. Stand fast, protect our legacy with all my love, Joshua." Tears prickled behind Rosalind's eyes. She took a moment to steady herself. "He knew," she said softly. "He knew there would be a time when I'd have to defend Carmichael Ranch with lethal precision." She laid the revolver on the desk. It felt balanced, nearly weightless, a masterpiece. Jonah, who stood off to the side, noticed a second slip of paper in the pouch. He handed it over. Rosalind opened it, reading more of Joshua's notes. They detailed rumored connections between Desmond Rayburn and a wealthy Eastern backer who'd bribed officials to seize lands rich in resources. "He believed Rayburn was just a front man," she murmured. "The real threat is whoever's financing him, which means it won't end with just Rayburn," Garrett said grimly. "If we topple him, another vulture will swoop in unless we have official recognition of our ownership and proof of wrongdoing." Rosalind carefully packed the notes away. "That's why we've got to finalize the ranch's federal protections." "Did that messenger we sent reach Judge Clayton?" "Yet, I believe so," Garrett replied. "We'll know soon. Meanwhile, we must brace for an attack. They lost track of you at the shack, so they'll push harder. Possibly come here in force." Rosalind looked at the custom revolver, at the swirling rose motif. Her father had once taught her that victory sometimes lay in the intangible cornerstone's identity, heritage, and cunning. Joshua had clearly believed something similar, or he wouldn't have prepared this secret contingency. "Tell the men to keep watch," she commanded. "At the first sign of trouble, they know what to do. With luck, we won't face a direct assault tonight." Jonah gave a tight nod. "I'll patrol the perimeter." Garrett clasped Rosalind's shoulder gently. "We'll protect the ranch. Mrs. Carmichael, Joshua put his faith in you, and so do we." She mustered a small smile in gratitude. But as the night pressed on, sleep eluded her. Instead, she cleaned and oiled the custom revolver. The Thorned Rose, she silently named it, working each chamber, checking the firing pin. By the time the lamp's flame sputtered, exhaustion claimed her. She dozed fitfully in Joshua's study, the weapon lying on the desk, a silent promise that she would carry on his defense of their land, come what may. Morning broke with an uneasy stillness. Workers moved about the ranch, but everyone seemed to sense an approaching storm. Garrett's men had discovered fresh hoofprints crossing the property's boundary during the night, likely scouts from Rayburn. By mid-morning, news reached them that Clint had ridden into town with more men, all sporting the brash swagger of people who believed themselves unstoppable. Rosalind gathered Garrett, Jonah, and 3 other veteran ranch hands in the main house to lay out a plan. "We need to stand firm," she told them, voice resonating in the small dining room where chairs creaked under the weight of tense bodies. "But we can't let them lure us into a suicidal shootout on their terms. We'll keep the ranch hands hidden, ready to respond if they force our hand." She laid down a drawn map of the ranch. "We can funnel their approach if they come from the south, if they try from the west. The terrain is on our side, Jonah. I'll need you in that wooded hollow here." She tapped a spot. Use it as an ambush point. If they open fire, you'll catch them off guard." Jonah acknowledged the instruction. "I'll scout vantage points that give me a clear line of sight." Garrett added, "Bradshaw and 2 others can be up near the ridge with rifles. If Rayburn's men push you, we'll provide covering fire." Rosalind nodded. She had to trust the men's skill. "Meanwhile, I'll remain visible. If Rayburn himself shows, I suspect he'll demand a direct confrontation. He wants me to sign over the ranch. He won't risk losing that advantage by blowing us all to bits unless we corner him. Their conversation broke when an out-of-breath stable hand burst in Mrs. Carmichael riders coming fast. Everyone sprang into motion. Rosalind grabbed her newly polished revolver and belted it on. She wore riding pants and a sturdy jacket, a departure from the skirts she usually donned to ensure she could move swiftly. Racing out to the porch, she heard the thunder of hooves. 5 men emerged in a swirl of dust and horseflesh, led by Clint. They reined up in the yard, surveying the scene with open hostility. Clint singled out Rosalind, raising a hand. Mrs. Carmichael Desmond Rayburn wants a word. Rosalind stood on the porch, one hand on her hip. He had his chance. If he wants to talk, he can do it here. Clint's scar bunched. We're not here to be neighborly. Rayburn gave you until noon tomorrow to come to the Golden Horseshoe and sign the deed. He told me to show you. He means business. He flicked a glance at one of his men who reached inside his coat and lobbed something into the air. Time slowed. Rosalind recognized the shape. Dynamite wrapped in oil-soaked cloth fuse hissing. She acted on reflex. Pivot, draw, fire. Her bullet severed the short fuse, the piece dropping onto the porch where it spat harmless sparks. The main charge flop diffused. The entire exchange took less than 2 seconds, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Clint's men gawked, stunned that she'd made such a near-impossible shot from the hip. Clint himself scowled. You should have let it blow, he spat. Rosalind kept her weapon trained on the group. That was your warning? Throw another one and I won't aim for the fuse. Clint's jaw clenched so tight a vein bulged at his temple. We'll be back. Mrs. Carmichael, don't you doubt that. He jerked the reins, turning his horse. Tomorrow noon. The Golden Horseshoe. Come alone or not at all. They galloped off, leaving dust swirling in the yard. Garrett, Jonah, and several ranch hands rushed forward. Are you all right? Garrett asked, eyeing the dude explosive warily. Rosalind nodded, reholstering her revolver. He wants me to come to him, probably has half the town as an audience expecting. I'll fold under threat. This means they're serious about forcing me to sign. If I don't, they'll escalate. Her gaze swept over the men. We'll plan carefully. They think intimidation will break me. They're wrong. She towed the dynamite aside with her boot. I'll be going to town tomorrow, but not for a negotiation they'll enjoy. I want you all to be in position quietly. Jonah exchanged a glance with Garrett. Could be a trap. They'll have more than 5 men. Are you sure you want to walk into that saloon? Rosalind felt her pulse throb, the memory of Joshua's death fueling her determination. No one else is walking in. I'll do it alone, or at least appear to be alone. You'll all be stationed near enough to intervene if shots are fired. She touched the custom revolver. If Rayburn thinks I'm bluffing, he's in for a rude awakening. Through the tension, she forced a grim smile. Let's show them Carmichael Ranch isn't up for the taking. Preparations for the next day unfolded like clockwork. At first light, Garrett assembled the ranch hands, quietly distributing rifles and posting them in strategic positions on the route leading into Salvation's Inn. This was no ragtag group, but men hardened by frontier life, loyal to both Joshua's memory and Rosalind's firm leadership. Meanwhile, Jonah departed in the dark hours, heading into town undercover to position himself and deliver final instructions. If all went as planned, by the time Rosalind arrived at high noon, friendly barrels would be covering the entire block around the Golden Horseshoe Saloon. Rosalind spent the early morning in Joshua's study, checking the locks on desk drawers and retrieving official papers, property deeds, tax receipts, notes that documented Carmichael Ranch's rightful ownership. She also had the legal forms from Judge Clayton's office. By placing her signature on them and dispatching them to the territorial authorities, she was effectively requesting federal protection. If it was recognized swiftly, it would mean that any attempt to seize the ranch by force became a direct offense against federal law. But such processes moved slowly, and she feared Rayburn's backers might have the power to quash legal red tape. Still, it was a move worth making. Around mid-morning, a new figure arrived at the ranch, escorted by Bradshaw, one of her watchers. He was introduced as Hamilton Forsyth, a representative from the U.S. Geological Survey, carrying a letter of introduction that had been intended for Joshua Carmichael weeks ago. Tall with a neat salt and pepper beard, he wore clothes a shade too refined for frontier life. Though bound and bruised from an altercation with Rayburn's men, he quickly presented his credentials and explained that he'd come to evaluate the rumored deposits beneath Carmichael Ranch coal, yes, but primarily oil. In the main house, Hamilton explained his mission while accepting a cup of coffee from Garrett Joshua. Carmichael wrote our office in Denver requesting a formal survey to confirm large reserves. My arrival was delayed by bureaucratic snags when I finally reached Salvation's End. Rayburn's men took it upon themselves to ensure I couldn't complete my task. He rubbed a bruise on his cheek. They wanted to know everything I had discovered threatened me. Fortunately, your men stumbled on me when Rayburn's group left in a hurry. Rosalind studied him with a mixture of curiosity and guarded hope. If you confirm the presence of oil and we file the correct papers, how quickly can the federal government step in? Hamilton sighed. I won't make false promises. The wheels of the Department of the Interior grind slowly, but an official condemnation of private takeover could at least give you leverage. Greedy speculators seldom want to stir up a high-profile legal battle. She nodded. It aligned with Joshua's thinking. I'll keep you close, Mr. Forsyth. Desmond Rayburn's main sponsor must be another powerful figure, one who stands to profit from controlling these resources. He's not just an outlaw boss, he's a hired gun. Likely so. Hamilton answered, voice grim. If their plan was to eliminate your husband, and intimidate you into selling it, nearly worked. My presence here is not welcome for them. Rosalind recognized the irony. The official involvement of a federal agent might be what saved Carmichael Ranch in the end. Stay here under my protection until this confrontation is resolved, or I can safely escort you to Prosperity Junction, she said. Hamilton agreed, though his expression conveyed the risk he felt being caught in the crosshairs of an open conflict. Meanwhile, word spread among the men about who he was. A flicker of hope sparked that perhaps the ranch had a bigger ally than just the local sheriff. The day wore on as final preparations continued. By late morning, Rosalind readied her horse, ensuring the special revolver was carefully loaded with the custom bullets Joshua had left behind. She'd tested the weapon the previous night on a makeshift target. Its accuracy was uncanny, well beyond any revolver she had used. When midday rolled in, she donned a dark blue jacket and wide-brimmed hat, stepping out onto the porch. Garrett stood by her mare reins in hand. His eyes were heavy with concern. Sure you want to ride in there alone? I have to, Rosalind said. If I don't go, Rayburn will come here in greater numbers, and we'll be fighting on our own land with innocent workers in the line of fire. She touched the custom gun at her hip. But we won't be alone. Not really. You'll be around, just not visible. She took the reins, mounting with practiced elegance. Around them, ranch hands paused in their tasks, each one aware that the next few hours could decide their future. Rosalind allowed herself one sweeping look at the ranch, the corrals, the barns, the fields. This was her home and Joshua's legacy. She would not let it be stolen without a fight. Time to end this, she murmured. Garrett stepped back and she nudged the mare forward. Despite the knot in her stomach, she rode with a steady posture, carrying the dignity of the Carmichael name into what might be her greatest battle yet. Salvation's End lay quiet beneath a blazing midday sun, as if the entire town were holding its breath. The main street, normally dotted with a handful of wagons and idlers, stood eerily empty. Businesses had locked up windows, shuttered. Word had gotten out that Desmond Rayburn expected a showdown with the widow of Carmichael Ranch, and people sought to avoid the potential crossfire. Rosalind guided her mare to a stop in the middle of the dusty road directly opposite the Golden Horseshoe Saloon. She noted the cluster of horses tied near the hitching post, at least a dozen, suggesting Rayburn had mustered many men. Two of them loitered on the boardwalk, exchanging smirks that vanished when they realized she had arrived alone and was not trembling or cowering. They stared her down, uncertain. Rosalind remained astride her horse posture, confident, the sun behind her so that those inside the saloon would have to squint when they stepped out. One of Rayburn's men disappeared through the swinging doors. The other stood with a hand on his belt, exuding forced casualness. She waited, letting the tension spool. After a moment, the saloon's doors swung open. Desmond Rayburn appeared, flanked by Clint and several more men. He wore dark finery like a peacock costume for a party, but the tension in his jaw showed he expected more blood than celebration. Mrs. Carmichael, he called, stepping onto the boardwalk. I half expected you wouldn't show glad to see you were ready to be reasonable. She made no move to dismount, offering only a faint smile. Reasonable is not the word I'd choose, Rayburn's polished facade cracked momentarily. Then I assume you're here to do business, sign the ranch over. Save us all a lot of trouble. Or maybe I'm here to serve, notice she countered, pulling from her saddlebag a rolled document bearing an official seal. You see this? It's a petition for federal protection on Carmichael Ranch. Once processed, the territory must recognize my ownership rights. If anything happens to me, it'll trigger an investigation led by the Department of the Interior. A ripple of unease crossed Rayburn's face, but he masked it quickly. Investigations can be circumvented. People can vanish. Deeds can go missing. He snapped his fingers, especially when well-funded men from the East want to bury the truth. Rosalind noticed a subtle movement at the far end of the street. A private rail car had arrived that morning, a rumor she'd heard, but not confirmed. Emerging from the gap between two buildings was a silver-haired gentleman in an immaculate suit escorted by two guards. He approached, eyes gleaming with refined arrogance. Rayburn turned, addressing the newcomer with forced respect. "Mr. Alderbridge, surprised to see you out here in person." So this was the Eastern sponsor. Constantine Alderbridge, the man who quietly financed men like Rayburn. Rosalind's stomach clenched. She'd guessed someone like him existed, but seeing him in the flesh drove home the reality that this was a war waged by powerful interests far beyond local cattle disputes. Alderbridge surveyed Rosalind with cool detachment. "Madam, I've heard you're reluctant to surrender a property of strategic importance. Let's resolve this amicably. My associates and I are prepared to offer you a sum well above standard valuations." She studied him, seeing none of the roughness typical of frontier outlaws. Instead, he exuded an air of corporate might, the kind that could ruin. "In lives with a pen stroke, no sale," she said simply, voice carrying in the hush. Alderbridge arched an eyebrow at Desmond Rayburn as if to say, "Handle this." Rayburn set his jaw. "Mrs. Carmichael, do you really think your little letter to the feds changes anything? I have men all around. You have no help. Nobody stands up to me and lives free." "Strange," she replied, glancing toward the rooftops. "I don't feel that alone." At that cue, a glint of sun on metal flashed from 3 vantage points. Jonah Garrett, Bradshaw, and others had rifles trained on Rayburn's men. As realization washed across Rayburn's face, his men shifted uneasily, hands drifting toward their weapons. "Steady," he hissed at them, Alderbridge. "Unreadable." "Venture to step closer. This ends poorly for you, my dear, if you insist on defiance. I can assure you the resources at my disposal, legal and otherwise, are significant." Rosalind's voice tightened. "You orchestrated Joshua's death." He gave a small shrug, not bothering to deny it. He was an obstacle determined to block progress. His demise was unfortunate but necessary. That was all Rosalind needed to hear. She felt a furious calm slide over her. "Then you already know how this ends," she said. "I won't be signing anything." Tension thrummed. Even the silent watchers who had crept onto balconies and behind shuttered windows felt the pressure. Alderbridge's 2 bodyguards drifted out, blocking any easy retreat. Rayburn's men, nearly a score, started to fan out. "Last chance," Mrs. Carmichael Rayburn declared. She didn't answer. Instead, Rayburn's hand twitched toward his holster. Rosalind moved faster, a blur of motion. In the next heartbeat, the custom revolver. The thorned rose was in her hand, roaring thunder. Rayburn's weapon flew from his grasp, struck precisely in the cylinder, the blow sending shards of metal flying. He staggered, cursing, clutching his stunned hand, a bullet that accurate in a pressure moment. Impossible, some might say, but not for the gun Joshua had commissioned, and not for the woman who'd spent years mastering its potential. Gunfire erupted from the boardwalk. Clint tried to draw down on Rosalind, but a shot from Jonah on the roof forced him to dive for cover. Another bullet from Bradshaw kicked up dust near a second man's feet, scattering half the group. Within seconds, the carefully laid plan neutralized Rayburn's advantage. Her watchers had them pinned in crossfire. Alderbridge's face went white with outrage. He barked at his bodyguards. "Kill her quickly," but they never got the chance. Garrett, hidden behind crates, fired 2 warning shots so close that the men dove aside. Everything hinged on this moment. Rosalind urged her mare forward a few steps, aiming the thorned rose at the now defenseless Rayburn. "Enough blood has been spilled," she said loudly. "Drop your weapons or die, Rayburn." Hand bleeding, nodded frantically to his men. Guns clattered to the ground. Alderbridge scowled but saw no way out. Then, stepping from a side alley, 2 more figures arrived. Hamilton Forsyth, showing his survey credentials, and Isaac Hartford, a federal marshal, alerted by Jonah's earlier message. The arrival of official authority put an exclamation point on the confrontation. Marshal Hartford's voice boomed, "Desmond Rayburn. Constantine Alderbridge, by order of the Territorial Court. You are both under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and suspicion of murder." Rosalind held the thorned rose steady, while the marshal and Forsyth seized the main culprits. Alderbridge tried one last protest. These accusations won't stand. I have powerful friends. Hartford's stare was unmoved. You'll have a chance to tell that to the judge. For now you answer to me. Rayburn's men, deflated and subdued, let themselves be disarmed. As they were marched away, Rayburn glared at Rosalind. This isn't over. She returned his glare with quiet finality. Oh, it's over, at least for you. Carmichael Ranch remains where it's always been, under my protection. With that, she holstered the thorned rose. The hush that settled over the dusty street echoed with a strange relief. Townsfolk peered out from windows, whispering. Sunrise illusions of the unstoppable outlaw gang had been shattered. In place of that fear stood a single woman who had refused to surrender what her husband left behind. As her allies emerged from rooftops and hidden vantage points, Rosalind felt a wave of exhaustion hit, but also deep gratitude. Joshua had guided her from beyond the grave, leaving behind the means to fight back. Her mind drifted to the memory of his voice, encouraging her to trust her aim and her convictions. Slowly, she guided her mare back down the main street. The tension that had built over so many days melted in the scorching sun, replaced by the sense that she had crossed a threshold. Carmichael Ranch was still hers, still free from the grips of unscrupulous men. In the days ahead, there would be legal battles, claims to file, perhaps a new arrangement with the government to ensure no one else tried to muscle her off her rightful land. But for now, she was content to let the acrid gun smoke disperse in the midday heat, assured that the next time the barrel of that revolver flared, it wouldn't be a warning shot, but a final statement of ownership and legacy. She rode off, flanked by Garrett and Jonah, leaving behind a battered but awakened town. The dying echoes of gunfire lingered, a testament to the truth. Sometimes to defend what's yours, you must stand at the intersection of grief and hope, armed with unwavering resolve and perhaps a single bullet's worth of precision that changes everything. Though Joshua Carmichael's name would echo in legend, it was now Rosalind Carmichael who carried their shared dream forward, the thorned rose at her side ensuring Carmichael Ranch would endure for future generations. Looking back on Rosalind's journey, it's impossible not to feel a surge of inspiration. She faced daunting odds, powerful outlaws, corrupt backers, and a web of secrets that cut straight to the heart of her late husband's dreams. Yet with grit, cunning, and the unwavering loyalty of her ranch hands, she proved how a single act of courage could uproot injustice. The very land she fought for now stands as a testament to resilience, where each sunrise over Carmichael Ranch is a reminder that perseverance and a well-placed warning shot can indeed change everything. As we close this chapter, we invite you to share your thoughts and reactions in the comments. What part of Rosalind's story spoke most to you? Any favorite moments or questions about what could happen next? Let's keep the conversation alive and discover together how one person's resolve can echo across an entire frontier.